Skill F. Placing steps in a sequence. 1. Campus life.
I need to apply for a room change. I'm having some problems with my roommate. Is this where I'm supposed to come?
Yes, it is. However, we don't grant room change requests except under special circumstances. If you have a roommate conflict, you have to try to resolve it first using the conflict resolution procedure.
Oh, all right. What's the procedure?
Basically, you get all the roommates involved together and each one conveys their perspective. Then you make a plan on how to resolve the problem and each roommate commits to making the necessary changes. After 1 month, there's a formal review.
Okay, thanks. I guess we'll try that then.
Number 1. In the dialogue, the woman describes the steps in the process of roommate conflict resolution. Put the steps in order. Number 2. How does the man probably feel before he speaks to the woman? Number 3. Why does the man say this?
Is this where I'm supposed to come?
Two. Communications.
The most important element in communication theory is input. Input includes all of the information we receive from the external world. People have the ability to filter this information if there is too much of it. There are biological and psychological filters. Biological means a person can only process and retain so much information at a time. For instance, a student cannot remember everything said in a lecture, so he or she takes notes on key points. The psychological filter is like selective attention, or you hear what you want to hear. So information a person is not interested in doesn't ever get processed.
Number 1. In the lecture, the professor explains filtering. Put the points in order. Number 2. What does the professor imply when she says this?
The psychological filter is like selective attention, or you hear what you want to hear.
Number 3. What is an example the professor gives of a biological filter? Three. Computers. A computer communicates with a printer via a parallel port. This means that the 8 bits within the byte are all sent simultaneously instead of one at a time. We call this serial communication, and it occurs through serial ports. The printer port has 25 pins. Pin 1 tells the printer that data is being sent. Pins 2 through 9 transmit the 8 bits of information in each byte. Pin 10 relays the confirmation signal to the computer. Pins 11 through 16 are for various functions such as printer error, out of paper, print job ready, etc. Pin 17 takes the printer offline. 18 through 25 are grounding pins. Let's compare that to another port on our computer. Number 1. The professor describes the process of a printer sending information to a computer. Indicate whether each of the following is a point in the lecture. Number 2. What will the professor discuss next? Number 3. According to the professor, which pins transmit the 8 bits of information? Five. Ecology.
Many of you may be surprised to hear that pollution is not necessarily a detrimental thing. In fact, it is perfectly natural. All organisms create waste. This is a basic part of life. It is not even a problem that the wastes are toxic. Many organisms also produce wastes that are toxic to themselves. There are, however, two problems with human pollution. First, it includes materials that the ecosystem cannot break down. For instance, we created CFCs, but nature cannot process them, so they float up and eat away at the ozone layer. Secondly, human pollution occurs in quantities that overload the ecosystem.
Number 1. The professor describes the process of human pollution damaging the environment. Indicate whether each of the following is a step in the process. Number 2. What does the professor imply when she says this?
Many of you may be surprised to hear that pollution is not necessarily a detrimental thing.
Number 3. What are the reasons that human pollution is detrimental to the environment? Choose two answers. Six. Campus life.
I just signed up for BLAST.
BLAST? What's that?
It's a volunteering program.
Really? I've been meaning to do some volunteer work. What does it involve?
Helping freshman students, conducting surveys, handing out flyers, making public announcements about events, and stuff like that. It's a good way to develop your public speaking skills.
It sounds great, but I don't have a lot of free time this year. I'm trying to get into law school.
Law school? Then it's perfect for you.
Yeah, I guess it would look good on my CV.
And it's not a big obligation. Just 30 minutes every other week.
Is that all? I could handle that.
Number 1. In the conversation, the speakers talk about their plans. Summarize the conversation by putting the topics in the correct order. Number 2. Listen to part of the conversation, then answer the question.
It sounds great, but I don't have a lot of free time this year. I'm trying to get into law school.
Law school? Then it's perfect for you.
What does the speaker mean when he says this?
Law school? Then it's perfect for you.
Number 3. What does the woman mean when she says this?
Is that all? I could handle that.
Seven. History.
Today's topic is the Middle Ages. We've talked at length about the Roman Empire, and you're well versed in Renaissance life, but what happened during the 1,000 years in between? The truth is, not much. There was a large migration of people into the former Roman territories, and this had a huge effect on society, law, culture, and trade. Life was arduous, which is perhaps why the one entity to survive the fall of the Roman Empire was the Christian Church. Since the Church promised a utopian afterlife to righteous followers, people had less incentive to fight to change their conditions here on earth.
Number 1. In the lecture, the professor explains how times changed between the Roman Empire and the Renaissance. Put the points in order. Number 2. What does the professor imply when she says this?
We've talked at length about the Roman Empire, and you're well versed in Renaissance life.
Number 3. According to the professor, why didn't people of the Middle Ages fight to change their living conditions? Eight. Biology. As you know, plants create oxygen. They do this through a process called photosynthesis. It is a chemical change occurring in the leaves of green plants whereby carbon dioxide and water are transformed into oxygen and glucose. Glucose can then be transformed into a starch and stored for later use. Oxygen is the waste of this process, but only in the sense that the plant gets rid of it. What is waste for the plant is an invaluable resource for the rest of us living creatures on Earth. In order for photosynthesis to take place, there must be chlorophyll, carbon dioxide, water, and sunlight. Number 1. The professor describes the process of photosynthesis. Indicate whether each of the following is a step in the process. Number 2. What does the professor imply when he says this? Oxygen is the waste of this process, but only in the sense that the plant gets rid of it. What is waste for the plant is an invaluable resource for the rest of us living creatures on Earth. Number 3. What are the conditions necessary for photosynthesis to take place? Choose 3 answers. Skill review. 1. Sociology.
Today, class, we're going to be continuing our examination of the nature versus nurture debate regarding human behavior. On the nature side of the argument, we have the belief that genes are more important than the environment in determining human behavior. Proponents of the nature argument believe that all human behavior is inherent and innate. This means that we are born sort of pre-wired to behave in a certain manner. Got it? Okay, conversely, people on the nurture side believe that instead of being born pre-wired, the mind is a blank slate at birth. This means that we are born without any predispositions, that our genes do not influence our behavior. All of our behaviors are a result of experience and conditioning. What do you guys think?
Well, come on. Obviously, it can't all be in the genes. I mean, we have free will.
But then again, I don't really see how it could be all environment either. I mean, look at those twins you always hear about. You know, they're separated at birth and grow up in completely different environments, but then they turn out to have a lot in common.
I'm glad you brought that up, Ellen. Twins can tell us a lot about our genes. Think about it. Identical twins share 100% of their genes. In the womb, the egg splits in 2 after it has been fertilized by the father's sperm. Because the split happens after conception, the genes are the same. The twins come from the same egg and the same sperm, so they have the exact same set of genes. That's why they look exactly the same. Fraternal twins, on the other hand, have a different set of genes. In this case, 2 eggs are released before conception. Then, the 2 eggs are fertilized by 2 different sperm. Fraternal twins are no more alike genetically than any other pair of siblings. Normally, they share about 50% of their genes. So, by comparing the similarities and differences we see in identical twins with those in fraternal twins, we can learn about the influence that genes have on human behavior. Think about intelligence. Some believe that people are born with a predisposition for intelligence. Others think that environmental factors influence how smart a child will grow up to be. So, researchers conducted a study that compared the intelligence of fraternal twins with that of identical twins. Now, all of these twins were from wealthy families, so we can assume that they had similar environmental advantages, good schools, good educational resources, etc. Now, they found that genetic predispositions accounted for most differences in intelligence. In other words, the studies found that with regards to intelligence, identical twins were more alike than fraternal twins. That means that genes do play a role.
So you're saying that it is more common for identical twins to have similar IQs than it is for fraternal twins to have similar IQs?
According to this study, yes.
Okay, but come on. Intelligence can't all be in the genes. Think about the implications. Surely there are studies that support the nurturists.
Indeed, there are. Researchers looked at the IQs of both fraternal twins and identical twins who were raised in adequate conditions with those of twins raised in poor conditions. What they found was that when poverty is considered, environment is more important than genes.
Wait a minute. How did they figure that?
Well, twins raised in adequate conditions have less intellectual variation than those raised in poor conditions. Remember the first study when the environment was controlled or kept the same? Identical twins were more alike than fraternal twins. All of these twins had the same educational advantages. What the next study found was that identical twins without educational advantages were not as similar as those who had them. Understand?
I think so.
So, as you can see, nature and nurture are not mutually exclusive. Human behaviors are a result of an interaction between genetics and the environment. Of course, nobody believes that human behaviors are entirely genetic, but research such as twin studies suggests that there is probably a role for the genes in shaping the people we become.
Number 1. How does the speaker introduce twin studies? Number 2. According to the professor, what is the difference between identical and fraternal twins? Number 3. Why does the woman say this?
Well, come on. Obviously, it can't all be in the genes.
Number 4. Based on the information in the talk, indicate whether each phrase below describes fraternal twins or identical twins. Number 5. What does the professor imply when he says this?
According to this study, yes.
Number 6. In the lecture, the professor describes the process of studying the intelligence of twins. Indicate whether each of the following is mentioned with respect to the research. Mark the correct box for each phrase. Two. Biology.
Everyone knows that the giant squid is, well, giant. It's extremely large, up to 14 meters long. If it were swimming next to your boat, you'd definitely notice it. If it were swimming next to you in the ocean, you'd probably want to get out of the water as soon as possible. In any case, if there's a giant squid nearby, someone is going to see it. And obviously, people have reported first-hand accounts of giant squid sightings. This squid appears in all sorts of drawings and stories dating back hundreds of years. It even appears in Herman Melville's classic Moby Dick, published in 1851. However, even though it's easy to see when it shows up, it just doesn't seem to show up that often. This species has never been scientifically observed alive in nature. It has never been filmed, and there are no pictures of a full-grown specimen. Around 15 dead ones are found every year, but there is not much we can learn from dead specimens. Several juveniles were caught near New Zealand in 2003, but very little was learned from them, since they all died soon after capture. So, where are all the squid, you may ask? They must be somewhere. After all, other animals eat them. They are common prey for sperm whales. Scientists have often found squid parts in the stomachs of sperm whales. Also, whales have been caught with scars on their bodies, which look like they were made by the suckers of squid tentacles. These suckers have rows of teeth, like oversized needles. If sperm whales often eat giant squid, then the squid must be fairly plentiful. In addition, the whales must know where the squid are. In fact, a recent attempt to find giant squid actually used sperm whales themselves. Scientists placed special video cameras on the whales. The scientists hoped that the whales would go looking for squid to eat, and in the process, would collect some useful video footage of the squid. This may have been a good idea. The whales did dive down to several hundred feet, So maybe this is where the squid live. Unfortunately, they found no squid, and the cameras only recorded black water. What makes the giant squid so elusive? The most widely accepted theory is that the giant squid simply move around a lot. According to this hypothesis, the squid normally live about 2,000 feet below the ocean surface. This is where they do much of their feeding. We assume that these squid eat mostly fish. Fish parts, particularly lanternfish, have been found in the bellies of dissected giant squid corpses. Because they are so big, the giant squid must eat a lot of fish. This means they're going to have to spend much of their time looking for sufficient food supplies. They wouldn't stay in any one place for long. The animals are also going to be looking for food at different depths. This explains why squid have been seen on the surface of the ocean at certain times. It may even be that giant squid mate at higher depths. All of this makes finding giant squid very difficult. There are some problems with this theory that the squid are always moving around, though. The most important one is that the squid, as I stated before, are frequently eaten by sperm whales. There are clearly enough giant squid to provide the whales with a lot of food, and the whales know where to find these squid in large numbers. If the squid really moved around so much that even one is difficult to find, how can sperm whales find and eat them so easily? It may be that the squid move to certain places at regular times. Sperm whales may know where these places are and when the giant squid will be easy to find there. For the time being, there is no clear answer.
Number 1. What aspect of the giant squid does the professor mainly discuss? Number 2. What are the two kinds of important evidence scientists have about giant squid? Choose two answers. Number 3. Why does the professor mention that the squid are common prey for sperm whales? Number 4. With what theory on squid movement are these points associated? Number 5. What does the professor imply when she says this?
There are clearly enough giant squid to provide the whales with a lot of food, and the whales know where to find these squid in large numbers. If the squid really moved around so much that even one is difficult to find, how can sperm whales find and eat them so easily?
Number 6. In the lecture, the professor explains different sources from which scientists have gathered information on giant squid. Put the sources in the order they are mentioned in the lecture. Chapter 2. Long Passage Skill Practice. Skill A. Understanding main ideas and organization. 1. Campus life.
Hello, I'm one of the students who needs to take the first aid certification course in order to go on the winter break meteorological expedition.
Okay, which course date did you want to sign up for? There are 2 courses offered every month, except for November when we have 3. The courses are all 2 weeks long.
What are the times?
Well, next month there are 2 courses. There's a morning and an evening course. The morning course is from 8 a.m. to noon, and the evening course from 5 to 9 p.m.
Huh. Well, you see, I go to class during the day and work at night. There's no weekend course?
I'm afraid not. The expedition starts in January, right?
That's right. We leave January 3rd.
Well, you could take the course in December after your finals are over.
Huh. Yeah, I guess I'll have to. How much is this course?
It's $300, which includes all aspects of first aid, including CPR and mouth-to-mouth resuscitation.
Who's the course instructor?
Jeff Fulbright. He's a retired paramedic with over 35 years of experience. This is a nationally recognized qualification.
What is CPR exactly?
It stands for cardiopulmonary resuscitation. Basically, it's what you perform on a patient who isn't breathing or whose heart isn't beating. It's like giving a car a jump start.
What do you mean?
Well, you know when you jumpstart a car, the battery is out of juice. So you connect it to another car's battery using jumper cables and use the energy from the working car to revive the dead battery. After that, the battery should replenish itself and be okay.
Right.
Same principle. With CPR, the heart has stopped beating, so you kind of pump the heart back to life by applying pressure to the chest in rhythmic intervals. You're like the battery giving juice to the battery without juice. Hopefully, by doing CPR, you will get the heart to start beating on its own again.
That sounds like a handy skill.
Sure is. The course will also give you some useful procedures for your expedition, like how to treat hypothermia and frostbite.
That's good, though hopefully I'll never need it.
Hopefully, you'll never need any of the training, but it's better to have it and not need it than to need it and not have it.
Well, can I sign up for the morning course in December then?
Sure. You can fill out this form and pay the $300 in cash, by check, or debit card. Or if you want to, you can register online at the website listed at the bottom of the form.
I see. Is there a registration deadline or anything?
The cutoff date for registration is 1 week prior to the start date, but it's best to register as far in advance as possible. It's rare, but sometimes the courses do fill up.
Well, okay. Thanks for all your help.
No problem. Have a nice day.
Number 1. What is the woman trying to do? Number 2. What are the speakers mainly discussing? Number 3. How does the man explain CPR? Choose 2 answers. Number 4. Listen again to part of the conversation and answer the question.
That's good, though hopefully I'll never need it.
Hopefully, you'll never need any of the training, but it's better to have it and not need it than to need it and not have it.
What does the speaker mean when he says this?
It's better to have it and not need it than to need it and not have it.
Two. Geography.
Who can tell me which African country has the strongest economy? Of all the countries on the African continent, which one has the largest and most developed economy?
Kenya?
No, I'm sorry. Try again.
I would guess South Africa. It's probably got the most modern infrastructure of all the African countries.
And you would be right. Now, let me tell you a little bit about the place. First of all, South Africa is located at the southern tip of the African continent and is home to about 45 million people. One interesting tidbit is that it is one of the few countries in Africa that has never had a coup d'etat. A coup d'etat, of course, is when a group, such as the military, takes over the government. So, the South African government has never been overthrown. Today, it is one of the most stable democracies in that part of the world. Now, that's not to say that there haven't been problems in South Africa. I bet you can guess what I'm referring to.
Apartheid?
Very good. Who can explain apartheid?
Literally, it means apartness or separateness. I think it comes from Dutch, because the Dutch were the first European settlers there. Anyway, as I read somewhere, apartheid was the systematic segregation of the races. You know, like for example, non-whites had to use different toilets from white people.
Yes. Under apartheid, the government maintained a policy of separating the white minority and the black majority. Keep in mind that we're talking about minority rule here. Early on, black people were barred from being members of parliament. It was a whites-only government. Now, apartheid was established in 1948 by the Nationalist Party. Effectively, black people in South Africa lived in a different world from that of the whites. They were required by law to live in certain areas called reserves and were denied the right to vote. There was a long struggle for democracy over the next 50-odd years. And it was not just the black majority who wanted to bring an end to apartheid. There were other ethnic groups who suffered under apartheid as well. Just to give you an idea of the demographics, there are 4 major ethnic groups in South Africa. Under apartheid, they were classified legally as black, white, Indian, and colored. Don't confuse the term colored with the old derogatory term for black people in the United States. In South Africa, it meant people of mixed race. The term is still used today, but since many don't like it, and since it has a different historical meaning in the U.S., I will use the term mixed race to avoid confusion, okay? Now, as I was saying, the demographics break down like this. 75% are black, 13.6% are white, 8.6% are mixed race, and then 2.6% are Indian. Now, like I said, the people of mixed race and of Indian descent supported the effort to bring down apartheid, and I should add that a few of the white people did as well. So after a long and difficult struggle, apartheid was dismantled by F.W. de Klerk in 1990. Yes, do you have a question?
Does everyone speak English in South Africa?
No, not necessarily. Most people do, I think, but there are actually 11 official languages. English is one, and I'm sure you've all heard of Afrikaans. That's the language of the Dutch settlers. It's sort of evolved into a new language over the centuries of Dutch settlement. The most commonly spoken language that's native to the area, I believe, would be Zulu. Then there are others, but I won't get into them right now. They should be in your book. Anyway, back to the different ethnic groups for a moment. You should be aware that South Africa has the largest population of people of European descent in Africa, and the largest Indian population outside of Asia. Not only that, it also has the largest mixed-race community in Africa. Now, as I was saying earlier, South Africa has the largest economy of all the countries on the African continent. It has a labor force of more than 13 million people. If we look at a breakdown of those 13 million or so workers, we can see that 35% of workers are employed in services, 30% work in agriculture, 20% in industry, and 9% work in mining. The remaining 6% are employed in other fields. Okay, so that's some general information about South Africa's demographics and economy. Now let's talk about their education system.
Number 1. What is the professor talking about? Number 2. What are the 3 main ideas in the lecture? Number 3. Why does the professor want to avoid using the term colored? Number 4. Why does the professor say this?
Anyway, back to the different ethnic groups for a moment.
Three. Chemistry.
I know you are all very familiar with the periodic table, but do you know the history of it? That's what we're going to talk about today. Okay, so as you know, the function of the periodic table is to organize chemical elements on the basis of their chemical properties. Over time, as we've learned more about the different elements, we've had to change the table. So, the table we know today has evolved over the years in conjunction with the science of chemistry. Originally, the elements were ordered according to their atomic mass in relation to the mass of a hydrogen atom, which is set at 1 atomic mass unit. Let me put that another way. The mass of a hydrogen atom is set at 1, okay? And then using that as the standard weight, all other atomic masses are measured in relation to it. That was how things were done at first, how the table was ordered. Over time, certain recurring patterns were noticed with regards to the atomic mass of elements. For example, in 1817, Johann Dobereiner noticed that some elements could be grouped together in threes, and the grouping had to do with the relationship between the atomic masses. You see, he observed that for some groups of three elements, if you ordered them according to their atomic masses, you would find that the element in the middle would have an atomic mass that was halfway between that of the other two. In other words, the mass of the middle element was an average of the other two. Let's refer to the periodic table in the book. Look at the elements lithium, which is Li number 3, sodium, which is Na number 11, and potassium, which is K number 19. If you add up the atomic masses of all three, which we don't have listed here on this table, then divide by 3, your answer is the same as the atomic mass of sodium. That's the law of triads. Another pattern was observed in 1863 by John Newlands. He devised the law of octaves. As you might guess from the name, it involves sets of 8. This law states that elements behave similarly to elements whose mass differs from them by a multiple of 8. In other words, every 8th element, when grouped according to atomic mass, has similar properties. Dmitri Mendeleev is considered the father of the modern periodic table. What he did was he wrote out the names, atomic masses, and other properties of each known element on separate cards. Then he ordered them according to their atomic mass. He noticed, like his predecessors, that certain properties repeated periodically. Not all of the elements fit the pattern neatly, though, so Mendeleev had to move some elements into new positions, despite their atomic mass. Although some nice patterns had been observed, the table was not yet perfect. So Mendeleev didn't actually make the table we see in our book today, but he did put us on the path toward this table. The problems Mendeleev had with his groupings were solved almost 50 years later when Henry Gwyn Jeffreys Moseley developed a system of assigning an atomic number to each element. Notice I said atomic number, not atomic mass. Try not to confuse those two. An element's atomic number is based on the number of protons within the nucleus of the atom of the element. So, the atomic number of an element is equal to the number of protons in the atomic nucleus. This proved to be a far more functional way to order the elements than by ordering them by atomic mass or by groupings. By ordering the elements according to their atomic number rather than their atomic mass, the problems with Mendeleev's table disappeared, and hence a far more comprehensive periodic table was born. So now, as you can see in your book, the table is organized into rows and columns. Each row is referred to as a period, and each column is referred to as a group. In some groups, all of the members of the group display similar properties. In general, we can say that elements share more similar properties with other elements in the same group than with other elements elsewhere in the table. However, there are a few periods, or rows, in which the elements share significant similarities. Does that make sense? What I mean is that any given element is a member of two things: a period, which is identified by the row it falls in, and a group, which is identified by which column it falls in. Got that? And in some of the periods, the member elements have similar properties. Then the columns are the groups, and within the groups many of the elements share physical characteristics and chemical behavior.
Number 1. What aspect of the periodic table does the professor mainly discuss? Number 2. What is the speaker's main point? Number 3. How does the professor explain certain points about the periodic table? Choose 2 answers. Number 4. What does the professor imply when she says this?
So, the table we know today has evolved over the years in conjunction with the science of chemistry.
4. History. We've talked about Roman mythology, which was adopted from Greek mythology when the Romans took over Greece. So, the Romans basically worshipped the same deities as the Greeks, but changed their names, right? There were various deities like Jupiter, who was known as Zeus to the Greeks, and the Roman god Mars, who was Ares in Greek mythology. I won't name them all right now, but basically you should remember that the gods were typically associated with natural occurrences and other phenomena, kind of as a way to explain things that people saw around them. One example is this. In order to explain the movement of the sun across the sky, Romans believed, as did the Greeks, that a god rode a chariot across the sky, carrying the sun from east to west each day. This god the Romans named Sol, which is where we get the word sun. Anyway, what was the state religion of the Roman Empire, before Christianity was established, that is? As the empire expanded, the Romans came into contact with foreign people with different beliefs. Remember, the Roman Empire was huge. At its peak, it included all the countries around the Mediterranean Sea and much of northern Europe as well. So, the Romans encountered a lot of different cultures. Now, the state generally tolerated the people's beliefs in the other regions, so long as they didn't interfere with the power of the state. Before we begin talking about the Roman cults, I want you to understand that the term cult, as we are using it here, does not have the same negative connotation that it has today. We are simply talking about worship. The foreign cults of Rome were groups that did not worship the deities that were the norm in Rome. The foreign cults worshipped different deities. Over time, some of these gods and goddesses were incorporated into the Roman religion, while others were suppressed. So, what began as tolerance for other religious beliefs led to the gradual incorporation of some aspects of those other belief systems. Some of the more well-known deities of the foreign cults included Isis and Mithras. Isis was the Egyptian goddess of fertility and motherhood. Mithras was the Persian sun god who emphasized strength and courage in the battle of good and evil. These are two examples of deities who were accepted into Roman mythology. Sometime around the 4th century, things changed in the Roman Empire. The cults related to all the various gods pretty much disappeared in Rome. Christianity became the new state religion. It had been gaining in popularity up to that time, but it was still in competition with the earlier cults. Christianity became the official religion of Rome under the Emperor Theodosius. At this time, all other forms of worship were banned, and as such, the other cults either disappeared or were practiced in secrecy. It is interesting to note, however, that quite a few elements of worship from these earlier faiths were incorporated into Christianity. Perhaps this was done in order to appeal to a wider range of people. For example, the standard day of worship for Jews, those Jews who became known as Christians, their day of worship was the Sabbath, the last day of the week. But this day of worship for Christians shifted from the 7th day of the week to the first day, Sunday, which is named for Sol, the god we were talking about earlier, who, by the way, was the most important deity in the Roman pantheon. Another example of a borrowed tradition is the use of evergreen boughs and trees to decorate the home in winter. This was a long-standing tradition among many cultures to celebrate the winter solstice and the return of the sun's strength. Today's tradition of a decorated Christmas tree is a direct descendant of those earlier practices. And while we're on the topic of Christmas, there is the interesting choice of December 25th as the celebration of Jesus' birth. This was also the traditional day on which the earlier Roman cult celebrated the birthday of Mithras. To recap then, the rulers of the ancient Roman Empire allowed foreign religions, including Christianity, to exist as long as they did not interfere with their power. During the first few centuries AD, Christianity became more and more popular in the empire, and in the 4th century, it became Rome's official religion by decree of then Emperor Theodosius. In order to gain acceptance from a wide base of the Roman population, Christianity adopted many aspects of other predominant religions of the time. Number 1. What is the topic of the lecture? Number 2. What is the main idea of the talk? Number 3. How does the professor emphasize his point about Christianity's appeal to the Romans? Number 4. Why does the professor say this? Before we begin talking about the Roman cults, I want you to understand that the term cult, as we are using it here, does not have the same negative connotation that it has today. We are simply talking about worship. Five. Campus life.
Come in.
Excuse me, Professor Altman? Am I disturbing you? I have a question about the exam.
No, come in, come in. What is it with you students? Always worried about disturbing me. Why is that?
Well, I don't know. Aren't professors really busy preparing classes and doing research?
Yes, that's true. But you see, forgive me, what was your name?
Emily.
Ah, yes, Emily. You see, Emily, these office hours are not my time to be making class preparations or doing my research. This is my time that is available for the students. This is why I am here now. Your tuition fees are paying for my house and car and the hot dog I ate for lunch. In return, I teach you about human behavior, if I can, and I hold office hours for you to converse with me. You see, it's an economic exchange.
Really? So we can just come in any time to chat?
Well, yes. During the office hours, basically yes, but it's always nice to be a bit prepared, of course.
What do you mean?
Well, as you know, there are many students and only 8 office hours per week, so we want to use this time wisely and efficiently.
Oh, like I should prepare a specific question.
Yes, that's always nice, of course. Having a specific reason is a great start and can accelerate the process. Some students, they want to get a good reference, so they come by all the time just to chat so that I know them well. Although I certainly want to get to know the students in my classes, that's too much,
So, mainly these office hours are just if we're having problems in the course.
No. Also if you would like some, further clarification of some concept as well. But if you do come in for a problem, don't just come in and say, "Oh no, oh help, I will never pass. It is hopeless. Please help me, Professor." Then I have to spend an hour asking questions to ascertain the specific problem. And sometimes students want me to figure out an adequate paper topic for them and get them started on their research. That is okay, but you need to come with some ideas, something to start with.
Okay, that all makes sense. Wow, thanks for taking the time to explain this to me. I should have been taking advantage of the office hours system a lot more over the past 2 years. They really should explain this to us when we start at the university.
Ah, yes, this would make perfect sense. But do they do it? No, it needs doing though. Then I have to do it. You don't have to tell me.
I wonder if there is some way to suggest it. Like, is there someone in charge of freshman orientation who could be told about this problem?
That sounds like an excellent question for your academic advisor.
Oh, you're right. I'll have to ask her the next time I go see her.
Anyway, Emily, how can I help you today?
Number 1. What are the people mainly discussing? Number 2. What is the professor's main point? Number 3. What does the woman learn from speaking to her professor? Number 4. What does the professor imply when he says this?
Your tuition fees are paying for my house and car and the hot dog I ate for lunch.
Six. Business.
TM. We are all used to seeing the symbol of a tiny T and a tiny M in the top right-hand corner of the name or logo of a company, but what does that TM really mean? Today I'm going to explain just what a trademark is and what function it serves. Trademarks are an important part of brands and branding. I will start by defining trademarks, and then I will move on to explain different kinds of trademarks. Okay. Generally speaking, a trademark can be defined as any word, name, phrase, design, logo, or picture implemented by a company to identify its goods and differentiate themselves and their products from the competition. That was a long definition, so let me repeat it for you. A trademark can be defined as any word, name, phrase, design, logo, or picture implemented by a company to identify its goods and differentiate themselves and their products from the competition. Trademarks are registered. That means companies notify a particular office in the country where they operate about the trademark. We could say that a trademark is a kind of ID badge, so to speak. Can anyone think of any examples of well-known trademarks?
Well, how about Coke?
Good example. That particular name can only be used by the Coca-Cola Company, precisely because it is a trademark. When a company owns a trademark, it can enforce its use and protect its rights by preventing unauthorized use of the product's name or design. So, for example, no other company can call their drink Coke, and no one can copy the Coca-Cola logo without permission. So, here we have the basics of trademarks. However, their use is not without problems, which brings me to genericized trademarks. Does anyone know what I mean by that?
I guess it must have something to do with generic products, like, for example, Q-tips. The real name of the product is a cotton swab, but most people call them Q-tips.
You hit it on the nose. That's exactly what a genericized trademark is. Sometimes a trademark becomes synonymous with the generic name of the products or services to which it relates. It then replaces it in everyday speech and makes it difficult for the company to exert its proprietorship. Trademark owners need to be careful not to lose control of how their trademark is used. Like you said, Q-tip is a good example. Another one is the bikini. I'm sure no one here today identifies bikini with any one particular company. To most people, a bikini is any two-piece swimsuit for women. Can you think of any other examples?
Is aspirin a genericized trademark?
Yes, very good. Some other well-known examples are Kleenex and popsicles. Anyone surprised? I see that a few of you are. Next time you're in the store, you might recognize a few more. Okay, so when a trademark becomes genericized, it's a problem. But what can a company really do? The best thing to do is to try to prevent it from happening. One way to prevent it is to avoid using the trademark as a verb or noun. A good example would be rollerblade. Rollerblade can be used as a noun or as a verb. Someone might say, I bought some new rollerblades, referring to any new inline skates, or they might suggest going rollerblading. A good way for a company to prevent this from happening is to discourage generalization of that company's name in their marketing. That reminds me of another example. Do you remember the old Band-Aid commercial? I am stuck on Band-Aid 'cause Band-Aid stuck on me. That's another example, isn't it? Band-Aid. What that company did was change their jingle to I am stuck on Band-Aid brand 'cause Band-Aid stuck on me. That reinforced the idea that Band-Aid is a brand and not a product name. Another example is Xerox. Because that was the first brand of photocopiers, people started saying that they were Xeroxing a document. Xerox then started an extensive marketing campaign to push the word photocopying.
But wouldn't it sort of be in the company's interest for generalization to happen?
Well, it certainly is a good sign for the company if their brand is genericized. That means it's popular, right? And it's true that many companies overlook the day-to-day use of their brand name to describe a product. However, there is a risk of losing control of your trademark. You see, it is possible to lose the rights and protection of the trademark if the name becomes too common. For example, Sony had registered the Walkman as a trademark, but the word became so commonly identified with the product that they lost their rights to the brand name.
Number 1. What is the topic of the lecture? Number 2. What is the main idea of the talk? Number 3. How does the professor explain genericized trademarks? Choose 2 answers. Number 4. What does the professor mean when she says this?
You hit it on the nose.
Skill B. Understanding details and facts. 1. Campus life.
Is there something I can help you with?
Yes, I have a few questions about that online tutoring service. I can't remember what it's called.
You mean smartthinking.com? I think I can probably answer any questions you might have. What would you like to know?
Well, I'm thinking of enrolling, but there are a couple of things I'd like to know first. Like, for one thing, are there any restrictions on log-on times? I usually do my work late at night, so it won't be much use to me if it can only be accessed during regular working hours.
Not to worry. You are free to log on anytime, anywhere.
That's good to hear. I've also heard that there is some kind of writing clinic or something. What can you tell me about that?
Ah, you mean the writing lab. Yes, what that is a tool to help you improve your writing. You could submit your writing to the online writing lab, and you will receive a critique with some constructive criticism to help you develop your writing skills. It's also open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
That should be helpful. Will I get an instant reply?
It won't be instant, but you will receive a reply within 24 hours. We give priority to distance education students because it is impossible for them to consult their instructors face-to-face. But everyone using Smart Thinking will get a fast response. Remember the 24-hour rule, though. If you have a paper due at 8 o'clock the following morning, you probably won't get your response in time. Always submit your work at least 2 days before the paper is due. Be sure to leave yourself enough time to do revisions as well.
What about security? Is there any chance somebody could get a hold of my paper and copy it for themselves?
Absolutely not. Everyone who has access to submissions in the writing lab is accountable.
Oh, the papers go to a writing lab? So these aren't English professors who are giving feedback?
No, your paper will be evaluated by a graduate student who works in our writing lab. Most of them are English majors, but even if they're not, they all have a strong background in writing.
I see. Now, I know that the tutoring program is free, but is there any kind of registration fee for first-time users?
No, there are no charges at all. However, only students currently enrolled at Citywide Community College can use Smart Thinking. It has been set up to provide academic support for our students, so unfortunately, we can't offer the service to anyone else. Are you currently enrolled at this community college?
Yes.
Great. What kind of computer do you have?
I have a Mac. That won't be a problem, will it?
No, not at all. As long as you have Internet Explorer, you'll be able to log on to the online tutoring system with no difficulties. I assume that you have a modem?
Right. I have a 56K modem.
That's fine. Then all you need to do now is choose your subjects and sign up.
Can I sign up right now?
Of course. Those 2 computers right over there have Internet access. You can use either one to log on and sign up.
Great, thanks.
Number 1. What is the purpose of the conversation? Number 2. What are the main points in the conversation? Number 3. Which of the following must be true in order for the woman to use the service? Number 4. Listen again to part of the conversation. Then answer the question.
I usually do my work late at night, so it won't be much use to me if it can only be accessed during regular working hours.
Not to worry. You are free to log on anytime, anywhere.
What does the man imply when he says this?
Not to worry.
Two. History.
I hope you'll all recall our lively discussion of Renaissance art from last week. We talked about such artists as Botticelli and Da Vinci, who really characterized the Renaissance through their artwork. Art, however, is not created in a vacuum. Art is a reflection of the world, through the eyes of the artist. So, what was going on in the world to inspire such great art? Well, that's the topic of today's lecture. We're going to talk about the intellectual and social movement that underlay the Renaissance. The movement was called humanism. So, what is humanism? Let's go back to the word Renaissance. As we talked about last time, the word means rebirth. And that's just what humanism was. It was a revival of antiquity. Antiquity, in this case, refers to the classic civilizations of Greece and Rome. Now, following the fall of the Roman Empire, we had about 1,000-odd years in which, well, nothing of note in the art world really happened. These we call the Middle Ages. The dominant school of thought during the late Middle Ages was called scholasticism. That's scholastic, like school-related things, plus ism. Scholasticism. A large part of humanism, the new idea in the Renaissance, was its rejection of scholasticism. The humanists felt that the scholastics were focusing too much on the church. So, the humanists were rejecting the predominant intellectual school in favor of the classics. The humanists studied the classical civilizations of ancient Greece and Rome and applied what they learned to their current society. It's not that the scholastics didn't know about the classics. They just tried to analyze them in such a way that the classics agreed with the church. That was their whole purpose, to find ways to reconcile Greek and Roman philosophy with Christian theology. In the minds of the humanists, society had been going in the wrong direction since the fall of the Roman Empire. Not that they wanted to return to those times, but they felt that more could be learned from antiquity than from anything that had happened since. It was this revival of old ideas that changed the way that European people in the late Middle Ages thought. Humanist thinkers started to create new kinds of art and literature. They even changed the way societies thought about education, law, and, well, everything. Simply put, humanism was the basis of the Renaissance. Now, as you may know, Renaissance thought started in Italy and spread to the rest of Europe. Most of the painters that we talked about yesterday, in fact, were Italian. But why Italy? The answer may surprise you. It was because of Latin. Remember, the humanists were looking back to the ancient civilizations. Much of their writings would have been done in Latin, right? Now, Italy was the only place where Latin was still studied outside of the church. As for the rest of Europe, only the clergy learned Latin because it was considered the language of the church and didn't really have any other use. So, it seems only natural that these Italian Latin speakers would be the initiators of a review of classic literature. If we want to point to one person who began the humanist movement, it would have to be Petrarch. In case you don't know, Petrarch was an Italian poet who was influenced by Cicero. Cicero, of course, was a famous politician in the final years of the Roman Republic. So what Petrarch did was translate a lot of Cicero's correspondence, letters to different people, and he also tried to imitate Cicero's style in his own Latin writing. Petrarch's revival of the teachings of Cicero was really what began the humanist movement, which of course spread from Italy throughout Europe. Now, some of the social factors that existed in Italy at this time are important to note. You see, Italy at this time consisted of two republics, Florence and Venice. However, there were neighboring states that were not republics, but instead were under despotic rule. Some of these despotic states were interested in taking over the republics, so the people of Florence and Venice felt threatened. Petrarch was from Florence. Now, it's a common occurrence that when a state feels threatened, its people tend to feel patriotic. It's kind of like a defense mechanism. So, feeling threatened, the intellectuals in Florence followed Petrarch's lead and began to appreciate the past. Florence had a rich history, and people wanted to celebrate it. Those outside pressures were fanning the flames of patriotism.
Number 1. What is the professor talking about? Number 2. What is the main idea of the talk? Number 3. Which two statements are true? Choose two answers. Number 4. Why does the professor say this?
Much of their writings would have been done in Latin, right?
Three. Computers.
Okay, class, let's take a quick survey, shall we? Jake, what is the hard drive capacity of your home computer?
80 gigs.
80 gigabytes. That's 80 billion bytes, or 640 billion ones and zeros. How did I arrive at that answer? Anybody?
Well, a gigabyte is a billion bytes, so 80 gigabytes is 80 billion bytes. Then a byte is 8 bits. A bit, of course, is a 1 or a 0. So if you've got 80 billion bytes, you multiply by 8 to get the number of bits. 80 times 8 is 640, so 80 billion bytes is 640 billion bits.
Well done. Now, that is no small amount of information on your personal computer, Jake. In fact, though, that is the current standard for home computers. We've come a long way, haven't we? Computer memory, as you probably know, actually had very humble beginnings, and I'm going to tell you about those beginnings today. We're going to look at the history of computer memory, have a look at how fast technology is improving, and consider what the future has in store. Okay, does anyone here remember the early Altair and Commodore computers?
I've heard about them. I don't think I've ever seen one, though.
Never seen one? Great. Well, I hate to give away my age here, but my first computer was actually a Commodore. Anyway, these antiques used paper tapes and cassette tapes, if you can believe that. To load a program, we would put the cassette in and press play. It took forever. That seems really antiquated to us now, but at the time it seemed pretty high-tech. Now, we're used to tremendous capacity and high speeds. Anyway, the first big breakthrough was when Steve Wozniak, co-founder of Apple, introduced the floppy disk. These were originally 5 1/4 inches across, and they stored a measly 160 kilobytes. Yes, Tom?
Why were they called floppy anyway? I've always wondered that.
Because they were floppy. Many of you younger people may not remember these either, but these disks were actually floppy and bendable. You know, I think I may still have one in my attic. I'll bring it to class next time. Anyway, the direct descendant of the floppy was the hard 3 1/2-inch disks you are probably more familiar with. Even though they were hard, they retained the name floppy so as not to be confused with hardware or hard drives. At first, both disks were sold, so people usually distinguished them by their size when they talked about them. So the 3 1/2-inch floppy came out in the mid-'80s with a capacity of 1.44 megabytes, which seemed like an awful lot at the time. For a few years, home computers featured drives for both the 5 1/4 inch and for the 3 1/2 inch. But by the mid-90s, the older 5 1/4 diskette had become obsolete. In our current times, we are witnessing the extinction of the 3.5-inch disk, aren't we? Actually, Jake, could you tell us what kind of external memory interface your computer has?
It came with a CD-DVD read-write drive and 2 USB ports, where I can use my memory stick.
It doesn't have any floppy drive at all?
Nope, I didn't need it, and I didn't want it. My memory stick holds 512 megabytes. Why would I need to use disks?
I don't blame you. Not to mention that CDs have a capacity of 700 megabytes. DVDs can store 4.7 gigabytes. And you say your memory stick holds 512 megs? I just bought the latest model on the market, and it holds 140 gigabytes. So you're right. Who needs disks anymore? While it is still possible to find a computer with a floppy disk drive, I predict that in the very near future you won't be able to find them. Do you know what else is funny? These devices are only going to get better. Anyone reading a transcript of this lecture 1 year in the future would probably find these figures laughable, just as we were laughing at the 5 1/4-inch discs. And when we tell our grandkids about how we lived, they will think it's hilarious. The rate of technological improvement in this day and age is astounding. To demonstrate, have you heard the new buzzword, terabyte lifestyle? A terabyte equals 1,024 gigabytes. It is estimated that in 5 years, the home computer will have a 5 terabyte hard drive. Amazing, isn't it?
Number 1. What is the evidence that the professor discusses for changes in this field? Number 2. What is the main idea of the talk? Number 3. What is an example the professor gives of an obsolete device? Number 4. Listen again to part of the lecture, then answer the question. It came with a CD-DVD read-write drive and 2 USB ports, where I can use my memory stick.
It doesn't have any floppy drive at all?
Why does the professor say this?
It doesn't have any floppy drive at all?